Well, welcome, City Church. I see some new faces, and I see some old faces that haven't been around for a while. It's good to see you, Debbie. Yeah. If you are new here, I like to say this anytime I'm preaching. I'm not the pastor, so don't get that confused. Pastor Pete is out of town, and we're going to preach on something. The title of the sermon is Get Out of the Boat. And I hesitate to, I almost hesitated to kind of give this. Pete gave me this kind of open opportunity because we're between series. And he said kind of, whatever you want. What's on your heart? And this thing just popped into my head, and I've been kind of rumbling around. But it can. The reason I was wrestling with it, because it can kind of almost feel like it's a pep talk, and that's not my intent. My intent is not to give you guys a pep talk or a rah-rah speech. So just kind of, I'm hoping to thread the needle somewhere between encouragement and challenging without the rah-rah, okay? So bear with me in this. And if you're wondering why I get to preach, because I'm Holly's husband. So this last weekend, we've got a son that is just turned 21, and he's at WSU. And yesterday, we were down there for Parents Weekend. Teddy, could you throw that first picture up? So this is us at Martin Stadium. We were watching the game, and Holly was in charge of getting the football tickets. And can you show the next one, Teddy? Those were our tickets. We were on literally in the front row. It was fantastic. So this was the highlight, and then our son is in a fraternity, and so we got to see his fraternity, and that wasn't the low light necessarily, but there was a lot. I'm not going to show you the rest of the pictures that we took. I mean, there was beer cans on the ground and McDonald's wrappers and pizza boxes and posters of Kardashians. And luckily, it wasn't his room, but nonetheless, and it's a weird thing to have a 21-year-old. I don't feel like I'm that old. I'm not naive. I'm 46. I can have a 21-year-old, but it's a weird thing. And so it really, kind of the last day or so, I've been just sort of reminiscing about life and how I got here specifically, and just kind of all the things that led up to that. I mean, even back to childhood. And if you don't know, I was raised a pastor's kid, and so it was. My parents both met in Bible college. Bible college is the actual thing. And they married while they were in Bible college and had me while they were in Bible college. And there's this back in Des Moines, Iowa, there's this denomination that was called Open Bible, the Open Bible denomination, kind of like Foursquare or Methodist, or it's just the Open Bible denomination. And so when you graduated with your pastoral degree, they placed you somewhere in a church. And our first placement, and I don't really even remember this, I was so young, was in Springfield, Oregon. My dad was an associate pastor there. And he did well as an associate pastor, I think, but the denomination came calling and said, hey, there's this little church outside of Chicago in a town called Kankakee, and we'd like you to take it. So you did what you were told at that time. And so we went to this little tiny church in Kankakee, and it was like, just picture Midwest, little town, brick building, tiny little sanctuary that held 50 people. And that's where he started his leadership in the church. We lived in, you guys familiar with this term called the parsonage? The parsonage next door. It's where the living quarters for the pastor and his family. I remember very specifically, like I think it was 3 or 4, but I gave my life to Jesus in the basement of that parsonage. But we were great people, just salt of the earth, good people. That church grew. So we outgrew that little building, and we bought the old high school from the city. And that little church of 50 in the span of like 7 or 8 years grew to about 500 people. But it was church life, right? I mean, especially Midwest church life. It's just potlucks and people all the time. And if you've never been to a potluck in the Midwest, most of it's just buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken and then white bread. And that's what we did. Green bean casserole. And it was good. It was church life. It was family. It was community. It was all good. But in a denomination at that time, they almost treated it like it was the minor league system, right? Where they sort of moved these successful pastors along to what they would call more important churches. I don't think they'd ever say that out loud, but that's kind of what it was. And so there was the denomination came knocking again. And there was this church in Eugene, Oregon, that was sort of like the flagship church because they had a Bible college in Des Moines and a Bible college in Eugene, Oregon. So this church that lost its pastor, and they asked my dad to come be the pastor of it. So we're making this huge move just as we're coming into junior high. And they struggled with that decision. This was family at this point, right? Good people, they loved us. And there was this act of faith that my dad had to leave this place. Didn't have to, but chose to. Felt like God was saying, this is the place to go. This huge leap of faith to uproot his family and move to Eugene, Oregon to pastor this church. Now, when God calls you to something, it doesn't mean you're getting called into something very easy necessarily. It's not always smooth sailing. Oftentimes, it's the opposite of that. And when we got to this church, this was a big church, big building, and they had a pastor for quite a while prior to us. And so there were some established rhythms and some cultural things that kind of an odd church in the sense of you had a really established older demographic and then a younger demographic that was kind of coming up. And so there was this sort of like a split, but they were all there. The church didn't split or anything. But we encountered some real tough things there. And so much so that at one point in a board meeting, let me back up just a second. When my dad took over, he's a really good organizational leader. And so he was kind of revamping some things, and that's tough when you have an established organization. But one of the things that he was trying to revamp is the financial books were a mess. And so you really couldn't make sense of them. And so he spent weeks and weeks sort of kind of uncovering what was going on with the finances. And finally got it to where it was, nobody was stealing anything, or there wasn't anything like that, but it was just a mess. And then there was a couple of board members that really didn't like the direction that the church was going. And accused my dad of some things that he never did, and later they recanted, but it was enough of a nudge and a smear that we ended up having to leave again. But how does that work, though, when you were called out of this comfort place, this place that you love, this place of family, to something new, and it doesn't go quite as planned? Anybody ever experienced that? We're still called to get out of the boat. We're still called to get out of our comfort zone and called to something else. It may not be exactly what we had expected, and there could be failures along the way, but like for me, I ended up here. I ended up marrying the love of my life because we made those moves. I ended up with 4 beautiful children because of that act of faith. So we may not see it immediately, but those challenges are for a good reason. Let's dive into the text. Matthew 14, 22 through 32. We've all heard this. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, the storms, because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." And Peter, doing Peter things, said, "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, Peter being Peter, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." That would have been a comforting place for Peter. Peter was a fisherman, if you remember. Peter's seen storms before. The boat would have been his place of comfort, even in the storm. But he gets out. If you're following along, point 1 on your outline is there will be storms. There will be storms. You see, God never promises easy peasy water walking, right? It's not in the Bible. If you find that somewhere, tell me. I'd like to see it. So put it on a bumper sticker or something. God, kind of the whole time, has told us, yeah, there's going to be challenges. In fact, James 1:2 says like this, and I don't love this passage. Everybody, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. That passage bothers me. James is the brother of Jesus, really telling us when the world is falling apart around us that we're supposed to consider it a good thing. Yep, he is. You got to think about what James knew as the brother of the Messiah and what he saw living in that day and age. What he saw was Roman occupancy, major oppression, uprising suppression. So if you got two out of line, the Romans came swooping in. What they did with the town next to Jesus, the road that there was an uprising in the town next to Jesus. There was a road that connected it. They crucified 2,000 people on that road just to say, stop. His older brother, the savior of the world, was betrayed, tortured, and murdered. Ultimately, he was stoned to death as one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. He says, consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, those are trials. Certainly, trials. Big things. We live in a world that consistently chooses sin over righteousness, and we're called to consider it pure joy when we face trials. We're called to do the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. The world doesn't want this message, and we're called to that storm anyway. But why consider it pure joy, right? Why not consider it something less than that? Consider it part of the plan. Or why not consider it something to tolerate? Or why not say something for the greater good? Or why not any emotional adjective short of pure joy? Because pure joy seems tough. Think about the biggest trials of your life. Think about the biggest storms that you've been going through. When was the last time in the middle of it you're like, it's awesome? You look around, you're like, yeah, my life's in chaos. It's cool. I don't get that right. But that's what we're called to do. That's what James says, that we're supposed to consider these things. Pure joy, nothing less than that. Pure joy, pure joy. Not let's kind of try to be a little happy. Let's take it on the chin. Pure joy. That's intense. That's a level of joy that I don't know that I can even attain without Christ. Right? And why is the question? Why do we need to consider pure joy? Well, James goes on to say in the next couple verses, James 1, 3 through 4, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. Oh, so there's the dots that get connected. James is saying consider it pure joy because of what the storms produce. The storms refine. The storms make us more resilient. They make us more steadfast. They produce character that we didn't know we had. And ultimately, they make us more useful for kingdom purposes. I've got 5 points. I swear I'm going to go through them fast, guys. Point number 2, if you're following along. God's timing teaches us trust. God's timing teaches us trust. So Matthew 14:25 in the King James Version, I like this. And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. The 4th watch, that's 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Or if you're Will Haley, it's 0300 to 0600. It's a nightmare trying to schedule something with him because he texts all the military time. And then when it gets past noon, you have to start doing math. Like 1600, 16 minus 12. Okay, 4. I'm good with 4. Or if it's like 1815, then your math gets all screwed up. So we debate about that constantly. But think about that. Jesus made them get into the boat knowing that they'd encounter a storm, a problematic passage, sometime that evening. He didn't get into the boat with them, and he didn't come to them until the crack of dawn. Does anybody remember what happened right before this in Matthew, in this chapter? Feed the 5,000, right. So Jesus fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and that number is probably closer to 15 or 20,000 because they were only counting men at that time. They had leftovers, baskets and baskets of leftovers. They had this amazing mountaintop, faith-affirming moment. I could almost imagine Jesus sort of pushing the boat out, wading into the water, and saying, let's see what you learned. I'm not hammering in on a theological stance here, I promise. Are you saying God causes tough times for us? No, we're not saying that. I am saying, though, that we live in a world that has rejected Jesus' sacrifice and trials are a byproduct of that rejection. And God certainly allows us to experience that stuff because it makes us more useful to the kingdom, and sanctification is a process, guys. Could God snap his celestial fingers and make our lives super cushy? Yeah, God could do that. God could. But look around at the mess that is America right now. I think that's a pretty clear picture of what cushy Christians produce. If you were to go and visit this location at the Sea of Galilee, you'd see they're pretty sure where Jesus fed this 5,000. It was on this big kind of open meadow. There's actually vineyards there now. And then it kind of led right into the lake. And then there was this mountains that went up on the side. And if you tour there, they'll take you to the spot where Jesus prayed. Very powerful thing. But what you'll notice, if you stand on that mountain, it overlooks the lake, which makes sense. But if it overlooks the lake, then Jesus saw the storm coming. And Jesus saw the boat getting tossed around. And he waited. He still waited. When we're in the middle of these trials and these storms and these things that are going on in our lives that aren't perfect or maybe even catastrophic, and we don't feel like we can see God through the storm, rest assured God still sees us. It's about where we put our eyes. He's trying to teach us to have a different vantage point. If we allow ourselves to be consumed with the things that are happening around us, we won't be able to find that lesson. But if we can somehow, in these times, settle ourselves and know that God is there and that God is on the other side of this trial, we have a deeper, more resilient faith. Hebrews 12, 1 through 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. If we learn to maintain eye contact, the storms, the trials, the things that we go through will not still be easy, but it will be purpose-filled. You'll understand in the moment the things that are going on and how they're going to affect you and how they're going to shape you and how they're going to shape your future. It doesn't mean that they still aren't hard, but they have purpose, and purpose matters. Point 3, God invites us to risk. What did they initially think when Jesus wandered out onto the water? It's a ghost. They couldn't see him through the storm. They couldn't make it out. But what did Jesus do? And this is powerful, guys. He spoke. He spoke. Do not be afraid. It is I. These disciples would have known his voice, even if they couldn't see him. We need to listen while we're in the storm. Peter says, if it's you, tell me to come out there with you. And what does Jesus do? He says, come. It's an invitation, not a command. He didn't say, Peter, get on out here. Come on, Peter. Get your butt out here. He said simply, come. And like I was saying before, even though it was a boat in a storm, that would have been Peter's safe place, certainly safer than being on the water. Jesus invited him, he's inviting us, out of our safe places into something much more dangerous. Even here in America, in the West, with all the things that all the opportunities and all the great things that you happen to have with being an American, he's calling us to something much more dangerous. But notice, Jesus didn't give him a dissertation onto how he was supposed to walk on water. He just said, come. That's us, right? To take that big step of faith, to be called out of the safe place. We want those lines and those dots connected pretty well. We want the end kind of shown to us. We want the journey kind of shown to us and mapped out. But God doesn't do that. God just says, come. We want details. God gives direction. We want a book, Water Walking for Dummies. We at least want the Cliff Notes. Why doesn't he do that, though? I think we'd probably all be more apt to jump out of the boat if he would tell us, hey, by the way, you're going to be able to walk on water. It'll be really cool. It's going to freak you out at first, but it'll be fine. And then the next step, yeah, that'll be fine too. And then the next step, and then you're going to go left. Okay, and left is scary, but it's fine. And then you're going to go straight again. And while that's still scary, you're going to be fine because I'm going to be with you. He doesn't do that. He just says, come. But why? Because that wouldn't require a faith rooted in the Almighty God. Also, because if we could see all the little mini storms, all the little trials that were going to happen along the way, we wouldn't go. We'd stay in our comfort zone. The invitation is the confirmation. So let's try to put some boots on that. Jesus says, come. You're a parent now. I don't know how to do that. Jesus says, come. Your marriage is on the rocks. I can't see how this works out. Come, you're called to a major career risk. How am I going to provide? Come, my child says they're gay. How do I love them through this? It says, come. I'm supposed to take this step into ministry. I can't imagine adding one more thing to my plate. He just says, come. And when we step out in faith with that, we get to experience things like walking on water. Otherwise, we experience an old wooden boat. Faith is just that. Faith is the willingness to take that step. And then the faith that the Lord Jesus is going to hold your hand through that whole thing. Point number 4. We need a sustained faith. It doesn't say how far Peter got before he started to sink. But the way it's written, you think it was at least a little ways. He at least was far enough out that he wasn't by the boat anymore. He didn't feel safe. It wasn't with arm's reach. And he wasn't all the way to Jesus, otherwise he probably would have held his hand and been fine. So he got part way out there before fear kicked in. But that's the beauty of this, right? That's the beauty of stepping out in faith and still being able to fail. What happened? Jesus is like, no, I got you. I have you. And he walks him back to the boat, and he sets him down. Jesus is there when we can't muster the faith to keep going. Like it said back in Hebrews, he is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. He's the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. We're called to the step. He's called to perfecting it. That's his job. I think we sometimes think we want to not just have it all planned out, but prior to the step, have enough change and goodness in us to take that step. And he's just saying, step. Step. I have you. I got you. You're going to be okay. We're called onto the water. It's Christ that keeps us buoyant. I'll be honest, when he says, you of little faith, does that bug anybody? Have you ever found a passage in the Bible you don't like? I've got a handful. That's one of them. Peter got out of the boat. Nobody else did. But here's what I think. I don't think Jesus was trying to say Peter's faith was small in stature. I think he was saying it was short in endurance. I think he was saying, you had a few more steps. I'm training you to have longer, more established faith. I don't think he was saying, because Peter's been real good at this point of doing some crazy stuff, right? The knucklehead of the apostles. But up to this point, it wasn't enough to continue to walk towards Jesus without sinking. Matthew 8, 5 through 10. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to the Lord, I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Compare Peter's and the centurion's faith. Peter is walking on water, literally, not figuratively, defying the laws of physics. Instead of recognizing that, what's he do? What's he see? The wind. So instead of going, whoa, this is amazing, he's going, this is scary, there's wind. But you're walking on water, Peter. The centurion says, I know what authority is. And Jesus, you have it. Jesus, or just speak it, and I have faith it will be done. You're the Son of God, just speak it. And Christ says, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Here's the thing, though. Little faith is still a measure of faith. I'm not talking salvation here. You can be saved and have little faith. You will just have little impact. Great faith means that you've got the potential for great impact. And that journey from little to great, it's up to you. We've all experienced enough to have great faith. Look around the room, and I know several of your stories. We've all had enough experiences. We've all seen enough storms, right? We've all seen enough trials throughout our lives for those things to shape us into having great faith. I don't know about you, especially as I look back at, kind of like I said, I've been reminiscing this last day, just thinking about a son that's 21 and I'm turning into an old man. And my thoughts bring me to, what kind of impact do I want to have on the world? How much change do I want to see for good because God used me? And I don't want to say that's a midlife crisis. Honestly, it's been really cool to sort of wrestle with that. We've got a lot of years left. Everybody in here has years left to have great impact. Last point, I'll bring it home. When it comes to faith, placement matters. This seems obvious, but our faith needs to be rooted in something. And it needs to be rooted in the real God of the universe. This is a really easy thing to say, right? Those words, I can string them in a sentence pretty easily. We can think about them, and it seems, even though as Christians it seems like a logical connection that we make. Obviously, our faith needs to be rooted in God. That is a much harder connection to make in your heart, though. And that transition has to happen for you to have deeply rooted faith. It has to move from here to here. And so I would encourage you as you leave tonight, and I'm wrapping up here pretty quick. We're going to have a time to pray about this a little bit too. But as you leave and you take on your weeks, just as you're in your quiet times, be thinking about the things, the trials, the storms that you've been through, but look at the connecting points. Look at the spot where obviously God showed up. You didn't see it in the moment, but now that with with hindsight being 2020, you can see that God showed up in that moment. Dwell on those things. That's how faith gets deepened, right? There's times when in the middle of it, God miraculously shows up and you're like, oh, yeah, cool. But oftentimes, God's bringing us through something for us to have this lesson on the other side. Hebrews 11:1 says it like this. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not need. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That feels a little bit like a cosmic wrestling match. Let's not forget a few things. Moses was promised the promised land, but did he get to see it? No, he did not. He saw it from a distance, but the rest of the Israelites went on without him. Abraham was promised a nation. How many sons did he have? About 8. David was promised the temple. Did he get to build it? He did not. His son built it. But their faith was placed in God, and these flawed men knew God is God, and they are not. God's ways, unfortunately, not our ways. Actually, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Thank God they're not our ways. So yeah, we have to ask, so am I just set up for a life of tragedy and despair? If your faith is placed in the things of this world, then it could seem like that. It's a matter of perspective. There's a lot of important work to be done here and now. And as Christians, we're called into that. We're called to step out of the boat, to walk on water, to look towards Jesus, to ignore the storm. If we can look at the tough stuff as an opportunity to develop a deeper faith, then those times have meaning instead of just being hard and gross. Water walking is a long play, not a short play. So I want to pray and dismiss us, but I just want us to spend a little bit of time in silence, thinking about what's your boat? What's the thing you're afraid to get out of, to step into more and greater and bigger things? So let's just spend a minute or two thinking about that, and then I'll wrap us up in prayer. Heavenly Father, tonight we ask that you identify our boats, Lord. The things that you're calling us out of, but also deepen our faith through the reflection that we're going to do this week, Lord, about the stuff that you've already brought us through. Help us to have the courage, Lord, to make that step out. The fear of the unknown versus the comfort of what we know. Sustain us, Lord, when we do that obediently. We posture ourselves, Lord, in a way that honors you. So grant us that courage. Grant us that courage to take that step out, Lord, as we identify these things. We love you, Lord. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the privilege of worshiping you tonight. In your Son's holy name, amen.